Hey y'all, welcome back to my monthly series of the books I read this past month. For the month of March, I read 3 books. The first book that I read was called The Funeral Crier. To be completely honest, I really did not like this book. It sounded promising when I read the description of the book. It's about a woman who works as a person who professionally cries at weddings. She is hired by the family who is grieving. And she's married to a man that she doesn't really like, and he doesn't really like her. She suspects that he's cheating on her, but she doesn't really have proof. And eventually, she enters into an emotional affair with someone on the side. And I thought that this was gonna mean that she was finally gonna leave her bad marriage and get on with her life and have a happy life with this other person who is nice to her, actually nice to her and treats her well. But then their side relationship ended up ending abruptly, and her husband ended up continuing his side affair, and then she was still miserable at the end. So I was really confused on what the point of the book was. So by the end I was like, this was a waste of my time. But it was an interesting read if you are interested in the cultural impacts of this sort of relationship. It is set in a small town in China. So there's a lot of cultural detail within the book that was interesting, but the general premise of the book, I was like, what was this whole thing about? The second book that I read was called This Girl's a Killer. This book was about a female serial killer who killed men, specifically who were either pedophiles or rapists, and or both, and or some other sort of quote unquote creep. And she is hasn't been caught for several years, and she realizes that her best friend ends up dating this man who she thinks could be fit her profile. So she's trying to figure out, is or is he not a creep? And then there's a series of different twists and turns from there. I won't give away what happens, but it was a very interesting read. I enjoyed that one. And then the last book that I read for the month was called The Man Made of Smoke. This one was a horror thriller one. Similar to the middle one, there is a serial killer that you kind of go back and forth between the past and present day. So they're in present day, they're trying to figure out what happened with this serial killer, because in present day the serial killer is probably dead. They figure that he's probably dead because at the time he was an adult killing people, killing small children. But there's still people who were affected by the children that were abducted are now being terrorized, because they think that their lack of involvement, their lack of action is why they're being targeted. So that was a very interesting read. I like the aspect of going back and forth between the past and present day, and the web that kind of gets described whenever you're figuring out how this person is connected to that person, how they're connected to this other person. So it was very interesting. I will say that that was probably my favorite book of the month. I also really liked the speaker who did the audio, or the reading of the actual audio book. So if you're going to read any of the books that I have read in this past month, I would say read that one if you're into horror and thriller. And as always, if you have any suggestions or recommendations for me for next month, then feel free to drop them in the comments.